Hi, Bethel. Today is Thursday. It's Passover. Thank you for joining me. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to move quickly. We're going to pick up right after Peter and John made preparations for the Passover meal. So the disciples did as Jesus directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. And when evening came, they sat down with the 12. Now, as they were eating, he said, "As surely I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were exceedingly sorrowful. And each one of them began to say to him, "Lord, is it I?" And he answered and said, "He who has dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me." Now, I like the way Mark puts it in Mark chapter 20. And it said, he answered and said to them, "It is the one of the 12 who dipped with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had never been born." When we take a look at John chapter 13, verse 27, immediately following that conversation, Satan entered into Judas. And then in verse 30 of John chapter 13, it says, "Then Judas left immediately." We go back to Matthew to take a look at the next step, which was the Lord's Supper. And as they were eating, Jesus took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then when he took the cup, he gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Now in John chapter 13, what Jesus does next is he begins to wash the disciples' feet right after the Lord's Supper. And he says, "If I am your Lord and your teacher, and I've washed your feet, you also must wash one another's feet." He said, "Because I leave you a perfect example of how we are to serve one another." Moving to Luke, we take a look at the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane in Luke chapter 22, verse 39. And it says in the prayer, "Coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives, and he was accustomed, and his disciples followed him. Then he came to the place, and he said, 'Pray that you may not enter into temptation.' And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw. And he knelt down and he prayed, saying, 'Father, if it be your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will be done, but let your will be done.' Then the angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he arose up from the prayer, he had come to his disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow. Then he said to them, 'Why do you sleep? Arise and pray, lest you enter into temptation.'" Verse 46 says, "Why do you sleep? Arise and pray, lest you enter into temptation." Immediately following this, Jesus is betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it says in verse 47 of Luke 22, "And while he was still speaking, behold, the multitude, and he who is called Judas, one of the 12, went before them, drew near Jesus, and kissed him. But Jesus said to him, 'Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?' Then those around him saw what was going to happen. They said to him, 'Lord, shall we strike with a sword?' And one of them struck a servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. But Jesus answered and said, 'Permit even this.' And he touched his ear and healed him. And then Jesus said to the chief priests and the captains of the guards of the temple and the elders who had come to him, 'Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs?' when I was with you daily in the temple, you did not try to seize me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. When Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, we know that in John chapter 18, verses 12 through 14, Jesus is examined by Ananias, the high priest. And then going back to Matthew, Jesus faces the Sanhedrin. Now keep in mind, all this is taking place on the day of Passover, on Thursday. Verse 26, verse 57 starts out, and Jesus is brought before Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. The chief priests and the elders even sought to bring false counsel or false testimony against Jesus to put him to death. But none found, the Bible says none found, even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at the last, 2 false witnesses came forward and said, this fellow said that I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. And the high priest arose and said to him, do you answer nothing? What is this these men testify against you? But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, it is as you say. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see me, or you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming of the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, he has spoke blasphemy. He has spoke blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look now, you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think? They answered and said, he is deserving death. And then in verse 67, it says, then they spat in his face, they beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one that struck you? The final thing that took place on Palm Sunday was the fulfillment of the word that Jesus had given to Peter, that Peter would deny him. And Peter was standing outside the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, you also were with Jesus. But he denied it before all of them, saying, I do not know what you are saying. And then another girl came to him and said, you were one of those that was following Jesus. But again, he denied it with an oath. I do not know the man. And then finally, those who stood by came up and said to Peter, surely you are also one of them, for your speech betrays you. Then he began to curse and swear, saying, I do not know the man. And immediately the rooster crowed. Peter remembered the words of Jesus. Before the rooster crows, you shall deny me 3 times. So Peter wept bitterly. Friend, Jesus had a long day on the day of Passover. And as we remember the Passover, I want you just to keep in mind that he did all of this for you and me. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.